A system notification sounded against a black void, confirming the game's completion and announcing that the ending would begin. A red and black vortex formed around a singularity as the system declared that it was over, then pointed to a moment 10 years earlier as the protagonist's eye came into view, his expression unreadable. A ruined city of collapsed buildings spread out before him as the system explained that this world had become the stage for a game, populated by players who could only survive by killing monsters. In the darkness, a single eye appeared as the system clarified that those who issued quests were called game masters. Floating in a star-filled void with his arms outstretched, the protagonist realized the obvious truth. The players were never meant to enjoy the game. As his form faded to just his hands, he acknowledged the distant beings watching from far above, and luminous hands descended to reveal them as gods. Some merely observed, others intervened through avatars, players chosen to act in their stead. The result was laid bare in a corpse split open to reveal cold machinery, followed by an empty plane where a lone figure stood as the system stated that humanity had come to an end. Looking upward with narrowed eyes, he scoffed that the game was a joke. After everything endured, the ending was humanity's extinction, a cruel punchline. As the vortex churned again, he resolved to ruin those responsible, recognizing that survival meant escaping through the wormhole above. But a rule barred chosen avatars from passing through, and he realized that he himself was one of them. His face filled the frame as he wondered whether his god would laugh at such an insignificant end, or look down with pity. He dismissed both notions, concluding that the god would instead blame him for the outcome. A system notice labeled the result a bad ending called Lonely World. He studied the achievement in silence, then reacted skeptically, admitting that if this wasn't a bad ending, he didn't know what was. Reaching for his sword, he remarked that the name fit, identifying himself as humanity's last survivor. The system congratulated him for completing every quest and announced an imminent server shutdown, then immediately revealed that a store was now available. He blinked in surprise at the mention of a DLC store, as an explanation defined downloadable content. Questioning why it appeared now, he swiped the interface as the system noted that DLC could be purchased with earned points. Kneeling, he realized there was only one option. A second package appeared, offering a completely new playthrough with special bonuses. His eyes widened as he questioned whether that was truly available, then frowned, reasoning that the gods couldn't know about it, otherwise they wouldn't have left him free. Injured and doubtful, he wondered if it was a hidden feature unlocked after completion, or simply his imagination. A brief laugh escaped him as a faint smile formed. Accepting it as part of the game, doubt still lingered, but grinning now, he declared that he could turn the tables. He calculated the cost, confirmed his points were sufficient, and pressed purchase, acknowledging that saving points late in the game had paid off. The system confirmed the transaction and promised special bonuses, adding that more products would be available in the second playthrough. With eyes closed and hands clasped, he prayed that it wasn't a lie. Starting again would let him change everything, especially the ending. A white flash swallowed the world. He gasped as his body reacted to the reset, then found himself sitting on a park bench beneath a blue sky, birds chirping nearby. Turning his head, he realized the world was real. Slumping forward, he sighed at how long it had been since life felt peaceful. A woman approached and asked what he was doing there. Staring in disbelief, he recognized her as Jisuhan from college. She asked if something was on his face as he remembered that she was a year younger, kind to others, and used to talk with him when he was alone. He told her not to worry as she stood beside him, reflecting that they'd been on good terms but never truly opened up. The thought of the very end lingered in his mind. Jisoo smiled gently, assuming he was tired from playing games all night. He looked up to respond but hesitated, dismissing off-panel concerns about grades with a smirk, saying the term hadn't even started. When Jisoo asked the date and confirmed it was August 17th, the moment froze. Slumping forward, he accepted that it hadn't been a lie. A sudden shrill sound shattered the calm. His eyes widened as realization struck, and a green August 17th stood as the anchor of everything. Slumped on the bench with his head lowered and hands clasped, the protagonist accepted that the reset had not been a lie as Jisuhan stood beside him. A shrill cry pierced the air. He remained frozen as shock registered through his widened eyes and parted lips, then sat upright, internally confirming that events were unfolding exactly as foretold. The ground split open, cracks racing outward as debris lifted, and a green-armored monster burst upward with purple energy pulsing from its core. He acknowledged that he had returned to the very first day, the beginning of a bad ending. Credits rolled, followed by a chapter marker, announcing a new beginning of the end. Exhaling deeply with his eyes closed, exhaustion washed over him as he realized he had truly returned again. Jisoo reminded him that classes would start the following week, and he avoided her gaze, offering only a brief, unenthusiastic response before quietly thanking her. His gratitude ran deeper than her concern, but she turned away dismissively, then glanced back after noticing something unexpected and suggested they move elsewhere. He questioned the sudden suggestion, then immediately understood why. Walking forward with his phone in hand, dressed differently than before, he noticed Jonghyun Lee nearby. Jonghyun smiled faintly at his screen and the protagonist remembered him, someone who had once fixated on Jisoo and judged him. Unable to recall what had happened to Jonghyun in the first playthrough, he inferred that the man likely hadn't survived the first stage. He reasoned that relocating was unnecessary if the issue was him. When Jisoo questioned his meaning and pointed out that he despised Jonghyun just a day earlier, he wondered if he'd really been like that, then dismissed it, saying he no longer cared. 10 years had already passed in his mind. Jisoo admitted that Jonghyun's staring made her uncomfortable, and he agreed to move to avoid the annoyance. As she scanned their surroundings with heightened alertness, he noticed something unusual in the distance. His eye widened as recognition struck. Everything had begun after her words 10 years ago. He recalled their idle small talk, her sudden alarm, and the moment others mistook what they saw for a film shoot. The truth revealed itself as repeated impacts echoed. A monster erupted near the university restaurant, followed by more emerging with hostile expressions. Bystanders reacted with confusion, some insisting it was a production, while shrieking intensified. Jisoo urged him to check it out, but he insisted on waiting, remembering that in the first playthrough he'd followed her forward. This time he decided she should stay behind and resolved to hold his position. Murmurs of indifference filled the crowd until something off-panel triggered his alarm. A monster lunged, stabbing a man as blood spilled. It roared, aggression surging, and he leapt forward with his sword. As the creature gathered energy, a swarm of goblins advanced, brandishing weapons and mocking sounds. Jisoo froze in shock as she realized they were real monsters. Civilians began running, the worst possible choice. Goblins stabbed people from behind, crushed shoulders, and slashed with axes, killing not from need but enjoyment. One smiled with its hand resting on a fallen human as another shriek echoed. Sensing something wrong, he grabbed someone and pulled them back just as Jisoo screamed for them to escape. Goblin lunged and he seized Jisoo's wrist, dragging her away. He remembered being weak and cowardly, freezing behind her as her blood splattered over him, leaving her behind and fleeing. He condemned himself for that past. As another goblin severed a limb and clenched its fist in anticipation, he charged forward with his sword drawn. System notifications announced the start of the second playthrough and synchronized settings as he tightened his grip, acknowledging that he had seen the world's end and that things were no longer the same. He sprinted into the swarm, pierced a goblin through the chest as purple energy erupted, and spun with relentless momentum. Vowing that this time would be different, he continued striking without hesitation, refusing to let events repeat. With calm resolve, he delivered the final blow, choosing action. A sharp notification rang out as a new record appeared, announcing that the first goblin on this stage had been defeated. The system explained that points were awarded each time a quest was completed, followed immediately by a first playthrough completion bonus that unlocked access to the DLC store. It confirmed that all remaining points from the first playthrough would carry over and could be spent freely on stat increases or items, then granted another bonus, forum access, pending synchronization. These were, it noted, the standard rules most video games followed. Synchronization completed, the system congratulated the player and declared the start of the second playthrough, reaffirming that this world now operated under the same game rules. The protagonist stood beneath the open sky with both hands gripping his sword, the blade buried in a fallen goblin's head as his body stretched taut. This marked a turning point. A first-time goblin defeat bonus was added, 300 points layered onto the balance he had carried over. He registered the number with controlled disbelief, 700,000 points from his first playthrough. His eyes narrowed, lips parting slightly as his hands trembled, sweat beading across his knuckles. He realized what this meant, exclusive access to pay-to-win items far beyond anything new players could touch. A player profile materialized under the name Sehun Kim, displaying a total of 700,300 points. He held his hands open before him, palms slick with sweat, steadying himself as a title card announced the return to the player role. The sky warped as a massive translucent eye descended, trailing purple energy toward the university campus. A message echoed through the plaza, welcoming them to the game of the gods and inviting them to participate. Jisoo-han stood staring upward while the protagonist remained beside her, arms crossed. The message continued, declaring that they must now become players and that every main quest was mandatory. Goblins swarmed the streets below, one human body already lying among them, as murmurs and disbelief rippled through the crowd. Further instructions, they were told, would follow. The protagonist reflected that this game existed for the gods' amusement. Instantly boosting his stats or upgrading his gear would draw attention, and when an eye-shaped orb rolled past on the ground, leaking purple aura, he confirmed his suspicion. Hood pulled low, he walked away, deciding to stay cautious now that players were being openly observed. Drawing suspicion could raise quest difficulty, and he understood they would not be spared. The goblin shrieked and lunged from behind. He caught its arm mid-attack, twisting it as the creature struggled, deliberately restraining himself just enough to appear challenged. He needed to look like he was barely holding his own. Goblin surged forward as he ran in profile, Jisoo-han and two civilians racing up a staircase while the monsters rapidly closed in. Jisoo-han's eyes widened as she took in the danger ahead. A goblin stabbed a civilian from behind, blood spraying as another loomed, and moments later a gray-haired man was clubbed, his head snapping back as goblins swarmed him. Breathless, Jisuhan dropped into a crouch, hands braced on her knees. The protagonist grabbed her wrist and pulled her onward, blood splashing across his sleeve as she glanced back in shock. A university building appeared ahead beneath a clear sky, trees framing an empty stretch of ground. Panting, Jisuhan asked what would happen to the others. His boots slid across the pavement as he reassured her that everything would be fine, leaving her confused as he calmly assessed that goblins were no stronger than adult men and that once people grouped together, things would stabilize briefly. He exhaled hard, sweat gathering at his temple as fatigue crept in. Under a red-black sky, the goblins retreated, and he noted that the calm would only last until a hobgoblin appeared. Seeing the reflection of goblins in his eye, he recognized the place from memory. Green light spread across the street as a barrier formed. They stopped at its edge, Jisuhan reacting in surprise as she recognized the safe zone while the system confirmed their entry. Leaning against a wall, the protagonist breathed heavily, remembering how he had once broken down here during his first playthrough, reaching it by sheer luck. Goblins charged the hexagonal barrier, shrieking as one slammed an axe into it, causing the surface to glow and crack before violently repelling the attacker. More slashed at it until the defense held firm, forcing them to turn and flee. From inside, Jisuhan watched in relief, then sank onto the pavement as exhaustion drained out of her. At his suggestion, they stayed put, sitting side by side. His gaze sharpened. Before moving again, Jisuhan needed to be armed, capable of handling a goblin on her own. The university rested under an orange-pink sky as trees darkened into silhouettes. Then a man sprinted into view, gasping and shouting as goblins chased him. The protagonist surged forward, sword drawn, driving the blade clean through a goblin's chest as purple energy burst from the wound, and the body collapsed. His grip tightened as items at his belt caught his attention. A civilian sprinted up the stairs, gasping with his mouth open and eyes wide as he fled through the gray corridor. He screamed in panic while two goblins closed in behind him, their pursuit accelerating. The air split as the protagonist dashed forward, arm extended and hair streaming back against the sunset. His strike landed squarely in a goblin's torso, purple energy bursting outward as his leg followed through. Goblins recoiled while civilians stumbled across the campus grounds, slashing sounds echoing beneath the orange sky, and one exhausted man collapsed where he stood. The fleeing civilian stared ahead, sweat beading on his face, then froze as he recognized Jisuhan, shock and confusion flashing across his expression. 3 hours earlier, the university had stood quiet beneath a blue sky, tree branches framing the grounds. The protagonist suggested they stay there for a while before moving on, and Jisuhan agreed, the two sitting side by side with their backs turned. As the moment settled, he decided she needed to be properly armed before they left, strong enough to handle a goblin on her own. Jisuhan checked her phone, wondering how he had found such a place and hoping rescue teams might arrive. His attention snapped to his own device when it refused to turn on, the red phone's dark screen reflecting his alarm as she watched. He sensed unseen eyes lingering nearby. Among the foliage, a massive eye with a yellow iris and red veins hovered, revealing the truth. The gods monitored players through observers, purely for entertainment. They chose favored players as avatars, watching them carry out quests for their amusement, while a darker presence hinted at the existence of a game master who managed servers and assigned missions. An eye-shaped orb spun nearby, glowing red as it identified itself as the private observer of Arcadis, the game master of Korea. Drawing on his knowledge of emergency procedures, the protagonist dropped into a crouch with one hand braced on the ground as Jisuhan called out in confusion. He wished desperately for the threat to leave, lowering himself further as an impact rang out nearby. Goblin's eye trembled amid splattered blood, no humans in sight. Then he surged forward again, motion tearing through the cityscape behind him. After half an hour of waiting, he leaned against a wall with his hood raised, judging Arcadis's impatience as a flaw he could exploit. A smug expression crept in as he reached toward a glowing interface, briefly considering the DLC store before choosing the forums instead. The system responded instantly, surprising him, while Jisuhan stood nearby holding her red phone, unaware of the light only he could see. He realized the interface was visible solely to him. Title announced a return to the player role. Sitting back, he reflected that the discussion had clearly centered on him and Jisuhan, and decided the chat room could later be used to gather information. A green card appeared in his hand, a multiplayer package introducing a new mode. He examined it as details explained multiplayer access after completing a solo first playthrough, frowning as party rules, member limits, shared skills, leader privileges, and a steep point cost were revealed. Saving 700,000 points made it possible, but he resolved to spend carefully. Shouts erupted nearby as a man in a red shirt pointed toward him, urging everyone to gather together. Confidence spread as some claimed survival depended on sticking together, calls rising to fight the monsters as one. Panic followed just as quickly, civilians scattered, goblins charged, and one person tripped while fleeing. A goblin clubbed a civilian, blood spraying as a woman screamed for help while monsters surrounded her. A shrieking goblin lunged, only for the protagonist to intercept and seize its arm, driving his weapon in with a hardened expression. As civilians continued running and urging each other to endure, tension tightened his pupils and clenched his jaw. Jisuhan asked if they planned to stay forever. He replied that it was time to leave, prompting her to admit fear at the thought of being without him. She questioned hunger at such a moment, and he agreed to go, forcing a strained smile. He noted that she had stopped asking questions, making things easier, while she observed how quickly she had adapted. Before they moved, he pressed a dagger into her hand. She recognized it as one taken from a goblin and questioned what he would do without it, remarking on how different he seemed and whether this was truly him. She accepted the weapon with thanks, grip tightening as he explained it wasn't durable but sufficient for self-defense. He then offered a brooch set with a green gem. Jisuhan recalled it dropping when she defeated a goblin and asked how he knew it was an item. The interface identified it as a VIP item that boosted recovery speed and point gains, glowing purple as the cost tallied. 10,000 points for hers, 20,000 including his. She realized its visibility could be toggled, and he explained that DLC items differed from regular store goods. She judged the expense worthwhile. Even so, the truth remained clear. Death still meant the end, despite the world becoming a game, and spending points to recover from wounds could mean survival. Final title appeared, naming a celestial slayer. Everything began with a coincidence. In the emptiness of white space, a single narration bubble framed the idea as a dark-clad hand closed around a glowing green gemstone, its emerald light slicing through shadow. Kim Gong-ya stared into swirling pink and purple energy, realizing his involvement started for no greater reason than having seen the stone. Crouched behind bushes, he parted the leaves, an insignificant motion that quietly set a far larger story in motion. Pagoda-style building stood beneath an orange-purple sunset. From above, a courtyard came into view, littered with corpses and crawling with goblins, the scale of danger immediately clear. Kim Gong-ya flinched, distracted by movement beside him, and found an injured hunter hiding nearby, clutching his side and groaning. Before he could react further, a powerful figure crashed into the courtyard, shattering stone tiles. Goblins shrieked and turned toward the disturbance as a shadowed figure panted heavily, the moment cutting off on a breathless cliffhanger. Exhausted Kim Gong-ya stood gasping, the severity of the situation crashing down on him. Jagged thoughts clashed in his mind as he dropped to one knee and hurriedly sketched a plan into the dirt. In the darkness, a single narration confirmed there was still a way forward. Silhouettes rose in his thoughts, lives balanced on perfect timing, as the weight of his final decision settled in. A sharp exclamation broke the silence. He exchanged a look with the wounded hunter, declared he would lead, and shouted his resolve aloud before lunging forward with his blade. At his limit, he activated a final ability, purple light spilling from his hand as a goblin screamed, and the tide finally began to turn. Just before being caught, Kim Gong-ya downed a purple potion. The UI identified it as a stealth potion with a 5-minute duration, and he immediately understood his role, bait. Entrusting the rest to his ally, he sprinted ahead beneath the sunset, goblins pouring after him. Once enough enemies had followed, he prepared the next phase. Chaos erupted as civilians fled and goblins swarmed. A man ran screaming through a gray corridor, terror echoing behind him. Kim Gong-ya spotted someone familiar in the distance as a civilian begged for help, forcing him to reinterpret the quest's objective, not victory, but survival. Saving more people had to mean greater rewards. Footsteps thundered across wooden flooring as he struck a goblin decisively, then sensed something he hadn't anticipated. A surge of power exploded within Jisuhan. As Kim Gong-ya collapsed injured, she demanded an explanation, his response edged with exhausted irritation. Her heart raced, breathing unsteady as the power surged beyond her control. She chose not to hesitate. Stepping forward to shield him, her resolve hardened under the goblin's assault. Her eye glowed red as the power fully awakened. Return to player, hidden boss. Kim Gong-ya advanced alone, worry for Jisuhan tightening his chest as goblins closed in. A civilian recognized him as the hidden boss just as he charged, matching the monster's aggression head-on. The UI confirmed agility allocation as his foot slammed into the ground, and he delivered a devastating slash. He swore not to repeat the deaths of the past. His grip tightened. Strength increased. Impact landed. Another goblin fell, the kill confirmed. He claimed a greatsword, pressed forward, declared the end, seized another weapon, and finished the enemy with a crushing aerial strike. The goblin was cut down as the UI announced the hidden boss's defeat. Rewards were granted, bonus points tallied, and Kim Gong-ya panted heavily while evaluating the item. The interface explained its effects, and he noted its strategic value before reviewing his rank. He delayed further stat investment and decided to leave before observers arrived. Searching for Jisuhan, unease crept in. Something was wrong. Fear spiked that she might have failed as goblins reappeared and chased him, their numbers swelling. Then he realized they weren't chasing him, they were afraid of something else. Blood hung thick in the air. He vowed not to let her die again. Jisuhan stood alive among fallen goblins. Goblins burst from the shadows with bared fangs and beating wings as they charged across the rooftop, the edge glowing orange in the setting sun. Sehen planted her feet and raised her blade, eyes locked on the gleam in theirs. Her sword flashed, slicing cleanly through a goblin's neck as green blood sprayed and the body collapsed onto the concrete. She flipped backward over another lunging creature, carving a deep gash into its shoulder before landing in a crouch, facing the rest as they hesitated. Her eyes burned crimson, hair whipping in the wind as veins stood out along her temples. 3 goblins lunged together and she ducked low, severing an arm mid-swing and sending it spinning away as blood scattered. She followed with a wide horizontal arc that cut 2 goblins in half at the waist, their innards spilling onto the rooftop, then kicked a third screaming over the edge. Leaping high, she drove her blade through a goblin's chest, shattered its ribs, crushed another beneath her weight, and watched the remaining creatures break and scatter as the sky darkened. She landed, wiped her blade with her sleeve, and breathed steadily among scattered corpses. One last goblin lunged, and she ended it with a single thrust through the skull, green blood spraying across her face and hair before it collapsed. She wiped her cheek, eyes still glowing red, as the survivors fled. With her back turned, she walked across blood-soaked concrete, stepping over bodies beneath a pink and gold sky, then glanced back once before turning toward the distant city skyline. Smoke and fading light obscured a figure near the rooftop edge as Sehen stopped and addressed them softly. Behind her, a pile of goblin corpses shifted and slid toward the edge, the rooftop falling silent except for the wind. Jisoo stood frozen, eyes wide and breath shallow, sweat pouring down as a sword struck the concrete nearby and embedded itself deep, cracks spreading from the impact. Sehen crouched amid gore, breathing hard as she called out, blood clinging to her hair. Others arrived, staring at the bodies and at her in disbelief. One woman questioned what had happened, remarking that goblins were usually weak and asking if Sehen had done this alone. A man in white pointed out a discarded stealth potion and explained he had been luring monsters when he encountered Jonghyun, now unconscious nearby. Shock rippled through the group as they recognized him, knelt, checked his pulse, and realized he had lost consciousness later than they thought. They speculated uneasily about what had frightened him, the tension lingering as twilight settled over the rooftop. In a stark white void, words declared that everything in the world had a price, that desire demanded payment, and that this exchange was the absolute law. A chance was offered to survivors, terms unfolding as a strained sound echoed in the emptiness. On a bridge beneath a purple-orange sky, Kim Sehen stood over a girl collapsed against the railing as a system notification chimed. Messages confirmed conditions satisfied, warned of erasure upon failure, recorded his choice, and declared the trial ongoing, punctuated by the recurring image of a red skeletal icon staring from the darkness. Resolve followed survive no matter the cost before a ruined city appeared, watched over by a massive warrior in a torn red cape. Text reflected that he once believed himself special, only to realize everyone else had been fighting to survive. Shadows of humanity passed by until the truth surfaced. A voice called Sehen's name, and he looked down at the girl on the bridge. She asked what he wanted and why he was acting this way. He told her staying meant death, asked if she truly wanted to survive, and reached into the air as digital light gathered around his hand. Survival, he said, required accepting terms. He offered her a glowing green cube, instructing her to take it and eat it. She asked if this counted as a contract, stared at the cube, remarked on his strangeness, and admitted she had no other choice but to follow him. They sat side by side as the sky darkened, until a questioning sound drew Sehen's attention down the bridge. Quest update appeared, warning of an approaching target. Sehen stared at it, expression hardening, and said he was ready. An engine roared, growing louder, until a motorcycle's headlight cut through the gloom. Sehen stood in front of the girl as the biker skidded to a stop, shouting demands for Sehen's belongings, or the girl herself. Insults and threats followed as the biker reached for a weapon, but Sehen refused calmly. When the biker lunged, Sehen asked him to wait, smiled faintly, and explained he needed a sacrifice. Confusion flickered across the biker's face just before Sehen vanished. In a blur, his hand cut toward the biker's head as new rules echoed in abstract visions. Only players mattered now, and the transaction was beginning. Panic set in as Sehen seized the biker, mocking his slowness. Bone cracked, flesh tore, screams filled the red-tinged air, and Sehen slammed the body into the pavement, shattering concrete. The final blow fell, and darkness swallowed the sound. The biker lay motionless, green blood pooling beneath his head. The girl stared, asking what Sehen had done. He wiped the blood from his hands and said there was no reason to be surprised. He was simply being efficient. Standing at the center of the bridge with the corpse at his feet, Sehen gathered the bloodstained spoils. In a white void, a final declaration rang out. A circular system message established the rule that monsters hunted the weakest first for efficiency. In the aftermath, a bloodstained hand gripped a faintly pulsing dark purple orb, its worn glove marked by countless battles, while silence lingered long enough for someone to wonder if the violence had truly ended. The black-haired protagonist remained standing, dust-covered and grim, as system notices declared the time limit expired and the trial successfully completed. The title returned to player appearing as confirmation. Another notice announced that the remaining monsters were dying, and small green goblin-like creatures collapsed and dissolved into black smoke until nothing remained. Only then did survivors realize the ordeal was over. The protagonist reflected that the second tutorial phase had ended as he stood beneath an orange-tinted sky, facing a ruined city bathed in pink and orange light. An off-screen ally asked if he was unharmed, and he calmly replied that he was fine. 3 survivors walked together, the man in front scanning the devastation with restrained surprise, while the protagonist later stood at an elevated edge overlooking the broken city below. A damaged gymnasium loomed dark, its interior littered with survivors resting where they had fallen. One injured player lay helpless amid debris as a man in a brown jacket knelt beside him, treating wounds with scarce supplies. A directive ordered the able-bodied to care for the wounded first, prompting survivors to work together and support those who couldn't stand, while others suggested counting how many had survived the second tutorial. The protagonist abruptly signaled for everyone to wait, turning sharply as an off-screen voice pointed out the person he was searching for. Narrowing his eyes, he fixed his gaze on a dark-haired man in a blue shirt who reacted with surprise when asked where Donghyun Park was. As they waited, system messages announced that rewards would be distributed based on contribution rank, that this was expected, and that the reward phase was beginning. Floating purple orbs filled the gym as the protagonist stepped across a glowing floor, purple energy pulsing around his legs and reflecting off his clothes. Nearby, survivors compared ranks while holding glowing items, and a system explanation clarified that these items proved stage completion and that higher contribution meant better rewards. The gym floor filled with people and floating rewards as a dark mass associated with the defeated boss lingered in the distance, and another notice declared that the top-ranked participant would receive a special reward, warning that rewards could not be changed or traded after selection. The man in the blue shirt studied a glowing purple card, while nearby survivors watched warily. Sudden murmurs rippled through the crowd as the protagonist walked straight toward him and stopped directly in front of him, staring without looking away. When someone asked what was happening, the protagonist coldly demanded the item. The man feigned confusion, gesturing innocently before the crowd, questioning why he should surrender his reward, even as sweat formed on his face. The protagonist's expression remained merciless as he stated that the reward did not belong to him, and accused him of lying about his role, the purple card still clenched tightly in his hand. The system display showed a countdown timer ticking down as disbelief spread, while the protagonist continued to stare in silence. A shadowy, monstrous image surfaced behind the man, symbolizing the traitor within, as the protagonist explained that the reward was meant only for the one who killed the boss. With no support from the crowd and his retreat blocked, the man lowered his gaze, silent, as reminders reinforced that the first-place reward was unique. A small dark orb on the ground began emitting unstable energy, and a massive vibration rippled through the area as the system declared the reward selection ended and announced imminent transport. Survivors realized the tutorial was concluding, some examining leftover items, until a warning flashed that something was interfering with teleportation. A red mark crossed out a monster's face as forced system intervention was announced, and purple light spread, freezing the protagonist and the man in blue in place. The man shouted in panic, clutching his chest as controls slipped away, while the protagonist remained calm. As confusion spread among nearby survivors, one of the protagonist's eyes glowed purple, and a system message announced that a new quest had been generated, one intended for him. A jagged spear manifested amid a piercing system distortion as new rules emerged, ordering the elimination of the traitor. The protagonist smiled coldly and accepted without hesitation. A prompt asked his goal as he turned to a man with reddish-brown hair and asked him to confirm whether he was Donghyun Park. Donghyun confirmed with a smug smile, cold eyes glinting beneath it. The protagonist regarded him with disdain, questioning his supposed heroism and declaring that Donghyun Park had only pretended to be a hero, a mass murderer in a previous timeline. Confusion and shock rippled through the crowd as Donghyun demanded an explanation, his friendly demeanor cracking while system pressure distorted the space around them. The protagonist stated that Donghyun knew what he had done, describing him as a monster in human form, while whispers questioned whether the accusation was true. The two faced each other in tense silence as Donghyun urged everyone not to listen, only to demand why he was being targeted. Unmoved, the protagonist told him it was over, offering a small knowing smile and remarking on his skill as an actor. The crowd instinctively cleared space as Donghyun begged to be believed, fear and malice twisting his expression. The protagonist declared it was too late and stepped forward beside a female survivor, distant goblin-like monsters watching from afar. He stated that everyone would soon see Donghyun's true nature, as the ruined city stretched beneath a burning red sky. Clenching his fist, resolve hardened as he vowed to kill the traitor himself. Images of another timeline surfaced, Donghyun choosing betrayal again and again, thousands dying by his actions, demonic shapes rising against blood-red skies, mountains of corpses beneath his feet, culminating in a verdict that he was a monster disguised as a human. The protagonist's eyes burned with vengeance as he mocked Donghyun's past attempts to speak for the group, while Donghyun answered with a wide, sinister grin. The final declaration rang clear. This time, Donghyun stood with her arms crossed, staring at Si-han with cold disappointment as she blamed him for everything that had gone wrong, insisting that trusting his judgment had been a mistake. Nearby, a system message hovered over a reddish-haired man who looked down and avoided the others, starting to respond before stopping himself. In the background, goblins continued slaughtering survivors while Si-han remained detached, stating that this outcome existed because of that man's action. The label identified him as Park Dong-hyeon, who stared ahead with a hollow expression. Yoon noticed the tablet in Si-han's hands and widened her eyes, struggling to process the data displayed as confusion spread across her face. The screen jolted as a hidden reward activated, and Yoon lifted her head, pale with fear, asking Si-han what his true goal was. System query confirmed Dong-hyeon's identity, and as he acknowledged it, Si-han's glowing eye sharpened while reading his status, the repeated name sealing his exposure. When Si-han began speaking about timelines, Dong-hyeon's fear surfaced, the environment destabilizing as disapproval rippled through the system. Bodies of monsters and humans lay scattered across the arena, the scale of loss undeniable. Si-han sensed a shift and looked upward as warnings announced forced changes to quest parameters and difficulty. Facing Dong-hyeon directly, he watched the man slump in defeat while a surprise quest triggered panic among survivors. As confusion spread, Si-han looked down at his hands, his returner status activating a hidden advantage, and a bold title announced the start of the counterattack. The rules inverted, monsters now hunted the strongest first, and glowing-eyed goblins charged as survivors failed to barricade doors, shouting in panic. An older man steadied a pistol and shot one down, but mockery followed, warning them to prepare for the king. Si-han remained still as survivors fled past him, focused solely on the boss. A system explanation revealed that the king grew stronger with every death, purple energy spreading as a massive shadow descended. Commands forced everyone to bow as Yi-yoon looked up in dread, realizing the overwhelming gap. A countdown began, the area locking down as the arrival of the Minotaur King was announced. Cracks spread, escape vanished, and Si-han alone walked toward the danger despite warnings of extreme level differences. The sky turned purple as a hidden stage activated, buildings crumbling while paralysis froze survivors and regeneration ensured time worked against them. Marked as the target, Si-han appeared calm even as the system mocked him, and Lord declared the king unbeaten. Black ash fell as the final phase began, sanity drained, and the Minotaur stood in a scorched clearing demanding blood. Si-han's eyes glowed blue as his power surged, his status rising while the boss landed with a shockwave that left him standing in a crater. Dust filled the air as taunts dismissed his survival as luck. The Minotaur revealed in divine-grade armor, every step cracking the ground. Steam poured from its body, dark energy swirling in its eye, as warnings announced imminent stomps and low durability. Leaping upward, chains of fate formed in Si-han's hands at the cost of his life force as he surged toward the boss's chest. Massacre mode activated, the king turning on bystanders as survivors fled and trampled each other. Accepting that not all could be saved, Si-han's empathy dropped as the system culled the weakest and the Minotaur slaughtered indiscriminately, growing stronger with every kill. Berserk mode ignited as survivors fought for limited portal slots, while Si-han ignored escape and ran straight toward the monster, refusing retreat. The Minotaur towered over cowering survivors and began a lethal downward strike, its roar blasting bodies aside. A girl froze as a beam formed, deemed a disposable distraction, and Si-han clenched his teeth and sprinted to intercept, rebounding off rubble and pillars with extreme speed. Explosions flattened the battlefield as he hurled a blue grapple toward the beast's neck, sweat tracing his face while survivors watched in awe. Standing atop broken ground, Si-han prepared his final gamble just as the Minotaur erased the remaining cover and roared in fury. Striking a hidden weak point, Si-han drew black fluid from the king, shocking the onlookers as warnings announced imminent self-destruction. Sorrow crossed a survivor's face as a pillar of fire erupted from the boss, blasting the remaining humans away. Amid the devastation, Si-han cursed the outcome and desperate. Veteran hunter walked with Jiang-han and female hunter past wooden poles, gesturing ahead, leading them deeper. He leaned closer to Jiang-han, placed a hand on his shoulder, explaining their current situation confidentially. Jiang-han's eyes widened at what he heard, and his composure broke as explanations sank in. His figure simplified as confusion overtook him, while female hunter pointed in disbelief, shocked by ignorance. Still flustered, Jiang-han raised a finger to explain, then faltered into silence as dots hovered overhead. Moment passed as scene returned to normal. Veteran hunter straightened, offered reassurance, guiding them onward. Female hunter moved ahead, urging them to hurry before food cooled. Table came into view, covered with soup, bowls, and meat. Female hunter sat with chopsticks, invited Jiang-han to eat freely, her expression sparkling with excitement at spread. Veteran hunter smiled at her enthusiasm, reminding her not to eat too fast nearby there. She immediately stuffed her mouth, cheeks puffed, praising the soup as the best part there. Nearby, hunter in blue cap ate with focus, while veteran paused mid-bite, noting moments of peace were rare. Fixing Jiang-han with gaze, veteran asked his thoughts on life there, then told him not to rush. Looking away, he reflected that things had once been different there. Jiang-han lowered his eyes, admitted his only concern was becoming stronger, prompting a nod and warning that strength carried cost always. The tension eased as Jiang-han took another bite, enjoyed it, drawing laughter from veteran and warm smile from female hunter nearby. Jiang-han drained the last soup from the bowl, exhaling loudly when finished at end. Rising to his feet, he adjusted sword bag strap and announced he was going to train there alone. He walked toward towering building, crossing open courtyard as daylight faded, while veteran and female hunter watched, noting boy was special there. Sky stretched wide with clouds over calm horizon, yielding to structure. In dim room elsewhere, bald man in blue jumpsuit sat on bed, staring at hands, sighing heavily alone. A yellow dog padded over, looked up, earning a distracted question before man petted its head, muttering it was his only friend. Without warning, he clutched his head in agony, groaned as startled dog jumped back, then snapped at it with bloodshot eyes wide. Si-Han stood with her arms crossed, staring ahead grimly as she wondered if this was truly the end. A system notice reiterated the rule that monsters killed the weakest first, while the beast's presence pressed down on the arena, its heavy breathing thickening the air as steam burst from the Minotaur's snout in short, predatory snorts. An indicator showed the administrator watching with clear disapproval. Si-Han fixed a nearby survivor with a cold gaze as the system announced a quest update. Yoon looked down at a glowing blue tablet just as a forceful notification slammed onto the screen, confirming that a hidden reward had been activated. Survivors scattered in panic when a massive foot descended toward them, but Si-Han never looked away from the boss. An unfinished system query hung in the air as a red-haired man lowered his head, then stiffened when the target was identified as Donghyun Park. Si-Han met him with open disdain, the system falling into silence until sweat streamed down Donghyun's face and a blue eye flared with power. The system confirmed Si-Han's returner status and displayed return to player, then asked what his next move would be. Beneath a burning red sky, survivors stood together in tense disbelief as the difficulty jumped to hard and the king's arrival was announced. Two distant figures loomed as a man exhaled and stared at the floor, the system reacting in shock without finishing its thought. Si-Han faced the boss head-on, his expression hardening as warnings declared an extreme level gap and repeated that the weakest would be culled first. A piercing screech echoed from a dark corridor, terror rippling through the crowd until the system answered its own question. This was only the beginning. Gunfire rang out as a man fired at the threat, only to watch his weapon click empty and fail. A warning screamed of an attack from above as a monster lunged forward, answered by an old man with glasses who raised his pistol, identified as a veteran. A surprise quest triggered, yet Si-Han stood among the crowd detached as the system questioned his goal and identified the boss as the Minotaur King. The city lay in ruin under the blazing sky as the king exhaled again, shadows spreading across the stadium. Earth Shadow activated. A man stared upward in awe as the system revealed the boss's level 30 and announced Berserk mode. The floor cracked and collapsed under violent impacts, cheers of desperation breaking out even as a warning of an imminent roar flashed. The Minotaur's purple eye pulsed with light, its breathing relentless, while Si-Han's returner status triggered hidden growth. A stat unlocked, a rank increased. Another shockwave hurled Si-Han back, carving a massive crater as the system mocked him and questioned whether he thought he could win. The Minotaur's immense form loomed behind Si-Han, its armor identified as divine as it exhaled yet again, silhouetted against the sun. Si-Han steadied himself, determination cutting through the chaos despite warnings of low weapon durability and an incoming stomp. He leapt forward as energy flared, the system reacting in shock when he struck the armor twice and confirmed a critical hit. He landed hard as survivors watched in disbelief, sweat pouring down their faces, while alarms screamed of a final blow and energy gathered. Metal rang out impact after impact as someone shouted Si-Han's name. A furious roar tore through the air, another blast of breath shaking the ruined stadium, and then the impossible happened. The Minotaur King collapsed with a thunderous crash and began to dissolve. Rubble continued to fall as a system pulse spread outward, the boss's eyes dimming before a final explosion echoed. Survivors stared in stunned silence until the system confirmed the clear, announced Si-Han's platinum tier rank, unique growth, and marked the chapter's end. In the settling dust, a barren landscape stretched out as a man appeared in silhouette with a dark grin. The system asked about the next quest while Yi-Yoon stood within a blue energy field, power surging around her. Another heavy impact shook the world as the trial of vengeance was announced and the surroundings crumbled. The system mocked the player and declared the arrival of the Crimson Asura, energy crackling as Si-Han narrowed his eyes. A dark figure with glowing eyes emerged, the narrative declaring that the real game was only beginning. As debris fell and a clenched fist trembled, the Asura's history unfolded, its power, its cruelty, while Si-Han stood beneath the red sky without fear, stretching his arms as his level rose again. The system questioned his identity as he found himself alone in a white void, the narrative describing his transformation into a monster. A low growl echoed as the Ashura's demonic face twisted into a grin, the system concluding that he showed no mercy. With the sun setting at his back, Si-Han stood alone,